Good morning, good afternoon. I'm David Willis and welcome you again to our Nurture Conversations. My co-host and dear friend, Dr. Dana Long, and I offer these conversations in order to advance nurture connection and early relational health for the support of strong, positive, and nurturing relationships and to build healthier, resilient, and more equitably connected communities. Dana, can I turn to you?
Hello. Thank you for joining us. I'm very excited about today's Nurture Connection. And just to let you all know what Nurture Connection is, we are a lively live stream that's hosted by Dr. Willis and myself. And our goal is really to explore in a very intentional and thoughtful way efforts across the country to advance early relational health that really transforms the well-being of families and communities. This is a series. We meet monthly, and we really want this to be fun conversation that sparks the imagination and helps us move along on the nurture connection journey. We want to talk to innovators. We want to talk to those experts across the country who are doing the work. We want to know what their personal narratives are, what their innovative pilots were, what their thoughts are about how to actually get the work done, how they are doing groundbreaking efforts, and how we better advocate to make change that really focuses and centers on families and communities. So we're very happy to be here today, and we have an amazing guest with us who I'll let you introduce, David.
Oh, yeah, that's great. And, I, like you, I so love these sessions because we get a chance to really talk with our most valued colleagues, our national thought leaders, our friends that inspire us. And today is really special because when you talk about leadership and one talks about really innovative transformational change, and we think about really imagining a future for all children and families much more successfully and meaningfully, Leonard Burton, who's now the new president of CSSP, represents that amazing opportunity for us moving forward. And Leonard and I, you and I met when my first gathering at CSSP and face to face at a strategic planning meeting, I believe. And you came right up. You and I had a lively conversation then as senior fellows. And we've continued to have those kind of touch points over time. So I'm delighted now that you've come now to be president of CSSP. And let me talk a little bit about Leonard, about what he's done and who he is. He comes with 3 decades of leading anti-racist, intersectional social justice work, including executive leadership in public social service systems, philanthropy, community change, faith-based program, and youth development. Previously, Leonard was a senior fellow at CSSP, working on systems change and public health policy teams and focusing on promoting healthy development and the well-being of young people, those especially in intervening public systems. He's co-developer of CSSP's and partnered Upend movement, which focuses on abolitioning family policing, and reimagining and creating better means of care for children and families that we'll get to hear about. Mr. Burton serves on the boards of the Building Bridges Initiative, as well as at West Ed. He's a national advisor and consultant to the National Child Traumatic Stress Network, faculty coach at the Breakthrough Series Collaboratives for Transition Age Youth and Fathers and Paternal Relatives and Child Welfare. He holds a bachelor degree in public administration, master's degrees in education administration and supervision, and he is a proud native of Detroit, currently lives in Huntsville, Alabama with his spouse, Cheryl. They have adult children and a teenage grandson. And of note, Leonard, you're a combat veteran of the U.S. Army, so you come with a wealth of background and experience and moving into this amazing opportunity that we now have with your leadership at CSSP. Dana, do you want to start us off?
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us, Leonard. And I would love to start off just with learning a little bit more about you. And can you tell us how you've gotten to where you are today? How did your journey lead you to now being the amazing leader of the Center for the Study of Social Policy?
Thank you, Dr. Long. Thank you, Dr. Willis. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. This is an important body of work for CSSP. The Nurture Connections work, early relational health is important to CSSP. How I got here, whether I'm an amazing leader or not, that's I think is to be determined. As David said, I've done work in social services, human services for the last 30 years in executive roles. But I think, as David mentioned, my background coming from Detroit, born and raised in Detroit, east side of Detroit. I'm very proud east side of Detroit. Some would say nothing good comes from Detroit, but there's a lot of good that comes from Detroit, and I happen to stand on the shoulders of great people. I come from a community, a working class community that changed. You can see it changing over time to the divestment of resources in the inner city in Detroit, and seeing white flight, seeing schools starting to crumble under our feet. But I also remember my aunt, who recently passed, worked at this clinic called Moms and Tots in Detroit. She was a phlebotomist at that clinic, and I remember that's the place where I got my vaccinations. And I remember the pediatricians that were in that place that were always loving and caring. That whenever there was some fear, that as a child going into that space, you could feel the care of the people around there, that allowed you to go in there knowing that no harm was going to come to you, and that things would be better for you as you left. And I was able to get into that space because I had a caring mother, a caring father. I, grew up in both my parents were there, and they always made sure that we were taken care of health-wise, that we were emotionally protected and ready, that we were loved. I lived in a two-family flat. My grandfather owned the home that I grew up in. My grandfather and aunt, they lived downstairs, and we lived upstairs. And in that, I was close to my grandfather. I could walk downstairs, and my grandfather would be sitting on the porch reading his Detroit newspaper, and listening to the Detroit Tigers on the radio at the same time. And I could always sit there with him. And then when it was time for him to go build a building, he was a master brick mason. He would take me, let me go along with him. I would carry the water as a little kid, but then as I got older, I was able to carry the bricks. And so it's being in a community of people. My maternal aunts and uncles were close. My first cousins, we all grew up 7 or 8 houses away from each other. And so that understanding how I was loved and cared for as a child, and what that meant to me in my growth and development is how I try to extend myself to the people that I'm around, and the work that I do. And last thing I'll say, there was a gentleman in my neighborhood, his paraplegic name was Reggie Bonds, and Reggie was I was around 10 years old, and I learned how to ride my bike around Reggie's house. And Reggie was the first person that took me to a Detroit Tigers baseball game. He was the person that took me to a first four-star restaurant in the Renaissance Center in Detroit. And it was because of those type of people in my history, in my background, is me. I have this need to give back the same things that people poured into me. I'm sorry that was a long answer, but that's why this work is important to me. It's people poured into me, people poured into my community, and we were blessed to be able to grow and develop that way.
I really appreciate your answer so much, and I appreciate it because as you were speaking, I took down a couple notes about some of the themes that you mentioned that are important, that are very much central to the work that we're doing with Nurture Connection. First theme you spoke about is the nature of those relationships, that they provided secure attachment, role models, folks that you knew always had your back. And that's really what early relational health is all about. The second reflection I had is I wanted to thank you for what you said about what healthcare can do, that the healthcare space that you entered as a child, it created a safe space for you. You felt like there was trust there and there was community. And as a primary care pediatrician, like that's the dream. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I was going to say too, Leonard, I got a little tear in my eye as I thought about your beloved community
Mm-hmm.
around you,
Mm-hmm.
multi-generational
Mm-hmm.
and purposeful.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got another tear because your words about deterioration, which
Yeah.
is create the urgency of reconnection desperately needed than all the forces we're wrestling with.
Yeah.
And do not allow so many young families to have that kind of joy and opportunity because of the forces around them. So, but I'm curious how you would think about our work around Nurture Connection and your leadership at CSSP, how those things come together, what excites you about being in your new role as president,
Yeah.
that could work, and then any threads you see as it touches the beloved community that we all believe in terms of nurturing connection.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you, David. So as a leader, I see it as my job to ensure that we at CSSP are holding true to our mission. We have to be laser sharp and have a laser sharp focus in everything that we do. And that is around achieving a racially, economically, and socially just society in which all children and families thrive. And that's the role, that's our mission, and that's the work that we do. And Nurturing Connection is part and parcel of bringing about, as we're calling this beloved community, one that is racially, economically, and socially just, that all children and families thrive. And in all our work, I'm always asking the question, how is this helping us to advance justice?
Mm-hmm.
How is it redressing? And we've had this conversation, how is it redressing past harms, and how is it centering Black, Indigenous, and Latinx and immigrant or LGBTQ children and families and others who are marginalized? As I talked about my community, the divestments, I remember seeing having a fish market on the corner, a fresh fruit market, and a grocery store, a cleaners, and all of those things were in my community. But then as divestments happen, you started seeing those fade away. And so, I have to ask this question: how are people who are marginalized in communities that are marginalized being harmed by our systems and public policies and institutional practices? And so, when I think about ERH, I see it as part of our efforts to reimagine systems as anti-racist, as equitable, as responsive, and working in partnership with families and meeting their expressed needs. When I walk into a clinic as a child, and if David's my pediatrician, a white pediatrician, I don't want to feel like David doesn't want to touch this beautiful Black melanated skin, right? That there's something wrong with my skin. When I was in child welfare, I remember in East Tennessee, there were some foster parents who were parenting Black children, and they would bathe them. We found out they were bathing them in bleach to get their skin, this dirt, what they thought was dirt, and this blackness off of their skin. And so we have to call out those type of harmful practices and structures that do harm to children and families. I see ERH as part of our efforts to ensure that our policies in this space are not creating barriers for families and excluding them for access to support. Where a poor family without health insurance in this society don't get the treatment and needs that they have because of failed healthcare policies in our country. We have to do better. I want to make sure that we're listening to families, that people are hearing what families need, and creating meaningful safety nets for all children and families, so that their basic needs are met. I mean, when we think about the basic needs of food, clothing, and shelter, we need to think, how is the work that we're doing in this pediatric space, in your pediatric space, you all, this is your world, and I thank you for inviting me in it. But how are the basic needs of children and families met? And I see it as a part of our efforts to ensure that those people working in systems understand the racist roots of our systems, that they are challenging their own biases, and that they're listening to and partnering with families, and not doing to families, but working with families. I see early relational health as the work of systems and those working in systems, to work in new ways in partnerships with families to support families' needs. Too often, we pathologize parents. We think that there's something wrong with them. We think that we're trying to teach them that we have all the answers. And the truth is that this is just white supremacy rearing its ugly head. And we're in a society now that is probably more dangerous than it was 60 years ago, as we're seeing what's happening. Parents, we know that, and at least I believe, that parents inherently love their children and know how to parent. I say that from my own experience from my parents and the way I try to parent my children. And then finally, a couple points here. We need fewer programs, David and Dana, that fix parents, and more programs that provide resources and supports. And we're looking at folks like something's wrong with you. No, you can't. What are the supports? What are the resources that we need? What if we were to take a historical look? What has been extracted and taken away from communities that have allowed communities to be healthy and whole? And how do we replace those and rebuild things that are positive and strong for children and families? And then we need to put the burden on supporting parents on systems and policies, as opposed to putting the burden all on the parents. And then systems have to change inherently, and they have to have policies to support, lift up, and bolster parents. And I mean all parents: white, black, Latina, queer parents, parents across the spectrum need support.
Dana, go ahead.
That image that you shared, Leonard, of you as a small child and going to David when he was a practicing pediatrician, and not feeling like he was afraid to have you as a patient and to examine you. First of all, I never knew Dr. Willis when he was an acting pediatrician, and I know that would have never been the case ever.
Right.
It would have been all about love. I do want to share the statistics to back up that analogy, that there was a recent study that showed that when Black birthing people and then Black babies are taken care of by white doctors, there is an increased morbidity and mortality associated with infancy of 2 to 4 increase in morbidity and mortality when Black babies are being taken care of by white providers.
Wow. What are we saying about our healthcare? What are we saying about how children and families are viewed? What does that say?
That is a current statistic. And there have been many studies that have also demonstrated that when Black individuals are being taken care of by Black providers, there's improved outcomes, including improved diagnosis and treatment. Particularly if there was a Black barber study that showed that when Black males are taken care of by Black doctors, there's improvement in how their diabetes is being treated and managed. So these images that you're suggesting are quite real. And problematic.
Yeah. And wouldn't it be great if we lived in a society where we didn't have those horrible data, where those outcomes weren't what they are, And so that's why for us at CSSP, the challenge around anti-racism is front and center. It's not something that is performative for us. It is a part of our DNA. It's how we respond, how we live, how we breathe. And the more we can get people to embody and embrace anti-racist and intersectional approaches to human beings, the better off our society can and will be.
And I think it touches so much of the ERH movement, the Nurture Connection movement, is trying to elevate and activate and push, as you would say, through both anti-racism and intersectionality. It's a big lift, but
Yes.
there are good voices.
Yes.
There are good hearts and good people learning, growing, and developing. I'm really interested how the upend movement came to be and your role there. And I think Dana and I would both say there's an upend movement to be built in health system redesign.
Absolutely.
We're about through Nurture Connection also. So the learning and the journeying gets to be really interesting because we're witnessing increasing languaging coming out about no more mandatory reporting out of pediatrics, but into mandatory supporting. People are starting to talk about, and Nurture Connection is not only about supporting, but also healing and recovery.
Yes.
It's a journey.
Yeah.
Thinking about what your experience has been with the up end movement on one hand, and how we start learning together into the health system efforts that we're keenly connected to for change.
Yeah, that's a good question, David. So how did Upend come to be? I'll give my story as I was a part of it being developed and birthed. And my colleagues, Alan Detloff and Kristen Weber and Bill Betancourt, we were sitting in a room, had been talking some time about disproportionality in child welfare, that Blacks are overrepresented across the spectrum in child welfare, in the child welfare system. And this is what I believe, that just as public housing, the experiment of public housing, and that's why they call them projects, right? People live in projects. So it was a project. It was an experiment. It's been declared that it was a failed experiment. And now folk in the housing development world, we have colleagues like Salin Gigervi, who's doing some of that work. Salin worked in the Obama administration at one point in HUD, but he continues to do that work. And he's a senior fellow at CSSP. So shout out to Salin. But that body of work was declared pretty much a failure, public housing, the way it had been. And so there's been a declaration that something needed to be done differently and better than what had historically taken place. And so it was a failed structure. Just like I believe over the last 60 years, what I call the modern child welfare system has been a failed public policy and a public experiment that has separated, surveilled, separated, and subjugated Black and brown people at rates that have caused more harm, more trauma, and more dismantling or destruction of the Black family, of Black and brown families in this society. And as a former child welfare administrator in the public system, I own, and this is where you talked about healing and recovery, David. I own during the 1990s when the contract on America was out there. There were state budgets reduced in child welfare. Federal dollars shrank. More state dollars had to be poured into child welfare, and as a result, many states began to balance their budgets off the backs of kids who were aging out, older kids. And so we would encourage them to ask the court to emancipate them at age 15 or 16, depending on the jurisdiction. And that was all about saving money in the budget. But there was no care for what was happening to these children. I can't imagine my own children, and I have adult children. I can't imagine me encouraging them to emancipate at 15, 16, 18 years old, and being on their own without any supports, without any resources. And so we said that this has failed. Child welfare has failed as we know it. It's causing harm to communities, to individuals, to families. And we need to abolish this harmful system and create a more just society where children and families can thrive. And as you said, David, it's a journey. There's no light switch that's going to happen. This isn't going to happen overnight. It didn't happen overnight. The harm that's been going on didn't happen overnight, nor is the change going to happen overnight. And what makes people afraid of Up-In is it's an abolition movement. And when they think abolition, you only think about tearing down, not imagining something different and something more beautiful and something better for children and families. Why is it that the community that I grew up in can't be recreated across this country?
Yep.
Where I don't live in a food desert, where I could get fresh fruits and fresh produce, I could get fresh food, I could get fresh meat, and that I'm not getting these sugary drinks, that I'm not getting. When I was working in Ferguson after Michael Brown was killed, and we were walking in the neighborhood, and there was a store there, and you could go in and you can get pure MSG off the shelf. I mean, it's like, in this Black community. And you see people going in and buying just junk food. This store is stocked with all kind of junk foods, but nothing that is healthy for folks. And so what we do at Up-In, what we want at Up-In is to imagine how a system, how a structure within our society that protects children, and allow children and families to thrive in their communities, and that the solutions are at the community level.
Agreed.
And if you have a set of pediatricians in these communities, when I think about Dulce, I think about that work that we do at CSSP. If you had that apparatus within a community, another Moms and Tots as I went to in that community, then that's a part of Up-In. That's designing something better and different for a community, for people, so that you don't have to experience these harmful ways of policy, programs, and treatment.
That's so exciting, Danny. I know you'll lean in a moment to talk about your leading amazing work, but that's exactly where Nurture Connections moving, be place-based and capturing the natural desire of every family to love their dear baby. Mm-hmm. And the supports and strengths of communities themselves that can come together, that building, but it exposes all the barriers that make it hard for families to do that. And arm in arm, we can find a path. And then but it requires, as you would say, how do we make visible the structural racist barriers that don't allow families to thrive? And we can see them. They're very visible. Increasingly so, we just have to take action, and that alignment of imagining a generational future, mm-hmm. of supporting families as we know can happen. We're starting to see it in communities.
Yes,
really interesting as it's emergent, even in face of the harmful policies that disrupt those efforts. People are working really hard, and our job is to expose them and have those changes happen at the policy level as fast as we can. But Dana, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that this is a great opportunity for me to really share some of the exciting work around racial concordance and what that means to healthcare, and really this combination of belonging and the beloved community with the health system. So starting this month, we actually are launching the first ever Black Baby Equity Clinic within an academic medical center at UCSF, where racially concordant, self-identified Black faculty and team members, including mental health clinicians, community health workers, lactation consultants, are all working together to see patients in a team-based, trauma-informed clinic. I'm really excited about the prospects of replicating the Black Baby Equity Clinic across the country. But we're launching in July at UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital in Oakland. It's staffed by myself and my dear friend, Dr. Jave Ross, who's an amazing Black faculty member. We are doing a rigorous evaluation of what racial concordance means to process measures, to utilization, but also to this more intangible sense of equity, healing, and belonging. We've applied to the National Institute of Health for an evaluation grant, and we're very excited about actually putting the theoretical talk of equity into action in a pro-Black framework.
There you go, Dana, your own little upend effort, right? That will be big and big and big for the next generation. I mean, it's generational wisdom that's coming forth here, Dana. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So much of your work, Leonard, has been about supporting youth to find their agency and to, them healing themselves to become really leaders. And we think the same of that in early relational health and nurturing, helping families find their voice, find their strength, find their healing. What's been your major learning from youth? I mean, what has really surprised you? What has inspired you about the youth movement? Because they're going to have babies here. They're going to have, they're our next generation too. How do we think about that? And what's inspired you?
Yeah, so they are going to have babies. They are having babies. I would even consider myself and my wife of 37 years as babies having babies.
Happening over here too.
My wife was 19, I was 21, and we were trying to figure it out. I'm in the military, and we have this baby, and then I get deployed to Saudi Arabia in 1990, and so I leave my wife with a 3-year-old, and at the same time, that 3-year-old, we have this 3-year-old. We bring in my sister, who's 14 years old, and I leave my young wife with a 3-year-old and a 14-year-old girls. And I'm off to Saudi Arabia, watching Scud missiles fly over my head, and hoping to get back home. And I'm sure she was too. So I owe her everything. I owe my wife everything. But children, young people will continue to have children, and they're often not supported. I was supported. I had aunts and a father at the time. My mother had passed, but we felt supported. Although we were miles away from Detroit in Fort Campbell, Kentucky, I knew that I could call and know that those people who took care of me as a child, as a young child, weren't abandoning me. That's not the case with young people who experience the foster care system. Not only are they not supported, they are often pushed aside and left on their own. And young people like me deserve opportunities that promote their health and well-being, allow them to maximize their power and promise, and support their ability to achieve the goals and dreams. Again, as a young parent, at 19 and 21 years old, did I think that at 21 years old, at this age, that I would be the president of the Center for the Study of Social Policy? Not necessarily, but I had people around me who continued to encourage me. I know my pediatrician from Detroit, his name is Norris Polk. And Norris was worked closely with my aunt, who was the phlebotomist, and Norris always encouraged me through my compulsory education that I could do and I could be. And he would let me come to clinic with him and to watch him in action at Detroit Receiving Hospital and at Detroit Medical Center. Norris was a great person for me. And so that was what he carried, and that people like you and Dana carry, David, that you can promote and support people from the perch that you're sitting in. And we also need a policy agenda to fulfill this vision. And we need to be clear about the policies that work and don't work. And this is the work that we're doing. In 2022, at CSSP, we brought together 27 young adults with experience in the foster care system to re-envision how society supports young people as a part of our CARES initiative. CARES is an acronym for Creating Actionable and Real Solutions. These are young people in Los Angeles, in New York City, and in Atlanta who help us think about what should a system of support look like. We're co-creating with them, the young people, a youth-centered and youth-driven policy agenda. Although my colleagues on the public policy team are brilliant and have great ideas, they can't do that alone. Nor can any of the projects that we have at CSSP be done alone. Although there's this great expertise and depth that we carry, we should always be thinking about the people who are affected by the ideas that we have and help them and bring them along with us to co-create the ideas and the policies and practices. As young people navigate the world, they, like all people, will do best if they're secure and supported in their families and in communities and have resources that they need to ensure their health and well-being and basic needs are met. I would also say for young people who have exited foster care, those on their own, we especially owe them an opportunity to achieve their goals outside of the surveillance system. They were brought into care because of sometimes abuse, neglect, maltreatment. And the other data point, it's an important data point, Dana, thank you for bringing out some data points, but one data point that's important for people who don't understand foster care, the child welfare system. 85% of the kids in care are not there because of abuse. Right. So we built an entire system around abuse, but it is really lack of resources that have been extracted and withheld from families that cause families to be in distress and struggle.
Unknown caller.
System that says bring them into foster care. And then once they get in and are at 18, we say, okay, we've had you for 18 years, or we've had you for 7 years. Now you're 18 years old. You're on your own. Go and do well. We owe them the opportunity to achieve their goals outside of that system that has subjugated them, that has suppressed them, that has surveilled them. We owe them the supports. We owe them to prepare them for post-secondary education, whether it's a trade or college. We owe them resources. I firmly believe this is one extension of reparations, that because we pulled you, extracted you from your community, from your family, and we arrested your development to a degree, because everything that a child does in foster care has to get approval from some worker. Every one of their appointments is scheduled by a worker or someone else. Before they can go to a sleepover, there has to be paid. So we've arrested their natural development and created and allowed them or forced them to operate in an institutional mindset. They might not have been in a hardware institution, but an institutional mindset. And so we owe that to them. And so I believe, and our colleagues on the public policy team at CSSP, we believe that every young person who ages out of foster care should be categorically eligible for basic income.
Yeah.
They should receive a basic income. I think we owe that to them. That's part of the repair process. And so the failures in policy across the public systems are clear for Black and Indigenous and Latinx children and youth. The policies that govern how these systems work create additional barriers as a result of racism deeply embedded in the fabric of this country. And because wages are too low as a result of corporate greed, many young adults have trouble meeting basic needs, and they face systemic barriers that get in their way to an ability to access concrete supports that are crucial for economic security and their ability to thrive.
We are right there with you, and as pediatricians, we've been in the unfortunate position where we see that the start of that child welfare struggle, driven by the lack of resources that make it really incredibly challenging for families, in the painful place of knowing they can't meet the needs of their child and then punished for it. It's absolutely tragic, and we live that, hence that upend thinking,
Yes.
right to imagining the world where we have mandatory supporting requirements that are relationally healing and supportive, right to while child tax credit is so essential, but also healing forces that are relational, recreating that beloved community of supports is really embedded deeply in our relational health sense. And we're right with you too. This is generational work.
Yeah.
Just as those young dear youth that are aging out of the child welfare system, whatever the right words are, should have likewise the networking supports to counter all the pain and the isolation that still exists deeply in so many of our communities and in our culture right now. So, this is generational work, and the health system piece, likewise, deeply absorb this same kind of exact thinking. Dana, where's your mind here?
So I do have another question and a thought. Leonard, I just want to let you know that your camera's off in case you can turn it back on for us, if that's possible.
Oh my goodness. It would do it, wouldn't it? It is. Oh, I'm so sorry. Let's see here.
So as you're figuring it out, I have another question about, we talk a lot about the work of equity and anti-racist framework, and we just spoke about some of your amazing work with youth in the foster care system. I'm wondering if you could translate that work a little bit more for us in the audience about how at CSSP we are continuing to really promote public policies that are grounding our work in equity and supporting strong, inclusive communities. Can you tell us what that looks like, how CSSP is actually translating those ideas and what success means?
So, Dana, I'm sorry. I got distracted trying to get the camera back up, and it's not coming back up, and I'm so embarrassed.
Don't be embarrassed. Let's just keep talking because it's all good.
So ask the question again. I'm sorry.
Yes. And so one of the amazing strengths of CSSP is this ability to translate ideas into action that promote public policies that ground us in the work of equity. How is it that you will say CSSP is successful in advocating for children and families? Like, what would wins look like in ways that we actually can create policies that help to promote equity?
Yeah, wins would look like young people and birthing people and young people in particular, because we have an expecting and parenting youth body of work as well at CSSP, that they feel and experience the power of their voices in shaping the way systems develop programs within their systems, but more importantly, how systems redirect resources into community and not force young people to get all of their needs met by the state apparatus. In other words, there are community-based organizations that are trusted by people in the community that often don't get the credit or opportunities as the 500-pound gorilla organizations that have all the back office sophistication, etc. That there are grassroots organizations that are doing the work, that are trusted by moms and dads and parents in communities that need the resources to continue doing that trusted work. And when you see a shift in investing in those type of programs, while evidence-based programs are necessary and helpful, they're not the panacea that many people have believed them to be. That there are evidence-informed programs, that there are programs. That's why at CSSP we have the Friends of Evidence. That there are different rungs on the ladder of evidence that are important, and CSSP wants to help create. Is trying to help create people to understand that there are different rungs of support and evidence. That everything doesn't have to be a randomized controlled trial to show its efficacy, right? That there are mom and pop shops out there that are doing work, that are creating space and opportunity where people are feeling cared for and supported. And so the other thing is when you see the narrative change about what foster care is and is not. So there are these myths about all these great things that happen in foster care. All right, that if you just take these children out of these bad neighborhoods and put them in foster care, all these great and magical things are going to happen, and it just isn't true. It's just not true that you take someone from those natural supports and put them into these artificial supports of foster care, or what I call oftentimes stranger care, and you think that a child will thrive. And so the more we see supports in communities and allowing, my grandmother, my paternal grandmother raised at least 15 of my first cousins at some point in time. All right. That she would never allow someone to come in and say, because her children were not in a position to take care of their children, that someone else, a stranger, should take care of her bloodline. And so my grandmother took care of many children, many of my first cousins, and there was a structure in place that allowed that to take place in that community at the time. And then the further away we got from appreciating the value of grandmas in the community, and we devalued grandmothers and valued strangers to care for children, it caused harm. So I want to see more. Talking about turning ideas into action. That's what Upend is about. It is this idea that a system is better, that a group home is better than a family for a child. That growing up in an orphanage, as you know, these large congregate care facilities, is better for a child. It is just not the case. And so what we want to do at CSSP, when we see success, is when we see children and families and communities being cared for and supported, and that where you find where someone, a stranger, is deemed worthy of public dollars, and you can provide housing, food, and clothing for a stranger to take care of a child. Those same dollars for housing, food, and clothing should be extended to that birth family, and along with the mental health and physical health services that one would need in order to be healthy and thriving.
We're right there with you, Leonard, because we've lived it in primary care, seeing it, feeling it, and the pain. And then I would say the helplessness that some of us as pediatricians in the midst of those struggles witness and couldn't make a dent in. And those of us that care, and we touch early childhood so deeply, it can be very different. We know it can be different.
Yeah.
And so together we can sort of work to find those paths. I want to ask you a question.
Mhm.
What's been your experience about having these hard conversations
Yeah.
in certain settings about anti-racism, health justice across the political spectrums? Because of course, that's the world we're living in. And how do we keep the conversations going and face, especially as we're thinking generational, healing, recovery, building? How do you have hard conversations and yet keep people in the dialogue? What's been your experience?
Yeah. I was in a conversation recently with a colleague. So for me, these aren't hard conversations, David. These are necessary conversations.
Yeah.
They're an imperative. They're a moral and a societal imperative. So for me and CSSP, health is a basic human right. Um, but in this country, it's not one that's guaranteed to all. And so systemic racism and a culture of white supremacy have created conditions within communities and in systems that actively threaten the health and well-being of people of color and limit their access to supports and make the supports that they do access less responsive, less effective, and quite honestly harmful. So in this country, Black women and birthing people are dying because we have a healthcare system that does not listen, that disregards their preferences, that does not provide responsive or even adequate care, and instead creates barriers to accessing care. And that's why the work that you all are doing is so important. We owe children and families opportunities for good health. To do this, we have to support communities and create the conditions that promote and prioritize health for everyone. So to me, David, this isn't about politics, and I'm not interested in making these issues palatable to policymakers. I'm here to communicate, and will continue to communicate the urgency and to put forward clear solutions and hold policymakers accountable to action. And so one of my colleagues was saying was asking me recently, how do we get the counter arguments to the table? And I say that's for someone else. To get the counter arguments to the table, that's somebody else's work. That's not my work. That's not the work at CSSP. Because as we try and bring these counter arguments to the table, we end up ceding more ground to healthy anti-racist policies and practices. For example, this what we've seen in the Supreme Court the last 3 weeks.
Agreed.
Right, and this is a result of us trying to, some of us trying to bring everyone to the table and leaving key nutrients off of the table, leaving key arguments off of the table. That we're bringing people into the table and we're getting sidetracked with the mimosas when we should be really focusing. When we really should be focusing on what the protein is that's going to help us have a sustained life. So I'm not really interested in trying to make it palatable. There are people who are doing that, and there's a role for someone to do that. I just don't think it's CSSP's role, and it's definitely not my role.
Thank you. Agree.
Yeah.
Agree.
I'm wondering, in the spirit of being solution oriented, we have discussed many of the elements of our society that are outraging and unfair and heartbreaking. In the last couple of minutes, I'm wondering if you could speak to what would make you feel like we did good. Like, what would 5 years from now, what will make you smile in terms of the wins that we hope to accomplish?
That forced births in this country are no longer a reality.
Mm.
That children and caregivers from all walks of life are valued and seen as valuable human beings and not expendable commodities for racial capitalism. To see the joy of children playing in playgrounds without violence, without a hot lead flying over their heads, or children in communities where lead paint is no longer a reality of their existence. That there have been investments by philanthropy, by corporations, by government to create healthy housing, more accessible healthcare spaces, and that people who are providing healthcare for children and families leave not only their biases at the door, but their naked racism at the door. That's what the success would look like for me in 5 years.
Thank you.
Nurture Connection will move right along with you with that same kind of exact vision, and setting the seeds and watching the communities where that begins to happen flourish, because we're starting to see it. And then also lifting them up, but pushing hard when we have to.
Yes.
The counter forces that don't allow that to grow and spread.
Yeah.
I'm right with you.
Yeah. And David, your point about you and Dana's point about how do you get other people at the table? You all operate. You have colleagues across your field, and you all have expertise in engaging folk and bringing them along. So it's not a matter of me shutting people out, but it's a sort of this both and. It is understanding when someone is taking you down a road that is counterproductive for the liberation and freedom of people, and understanding that there are people who are really interested, who may have a misunderstanding about what other people value, and how other folk need to be supported and made healthy and whole. And there is no bootstraps to be pulled up by.
No. And Leonard, that's the beauty of having an impact network strategy as we have with Nurture Connection, because people are moving along and growing together and learning and making ever more visible that beloved community opportunity and exposing what disrupts that.
Yes.
It's clearer and clearer and clearer across our big networks. And that's the movement making element that none of us can tolerate much longer.
Yeah.
What's been what has been historical, and you can't suppress it.
No.
Even though there are forces trying to do so.
Yeah. Well, you got a partner in me, David.
Vice versa. We're all in this together. This is really good.
Yeah.
And Leonard, welcome to CSSP as president. Thank you for your stepping in with your soul, your heart, your vision. We'll do everything we can do to support your success. And I'm really eager for the growing partnership and visioning together.
Absolutely. Likewise, David. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Long. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And we have a couple seconds just for last words. And so I just want to say that I am hoping 30 years from now, I will have a patient
Dentist Mike Jensen,
like you, Leonard, who is getting on a podcast or some form of media and thinking, just like you did Dr. Norris, I want to be just like Dr. Norris. I hope there are lots of young babies out there who, who I can inspire to be amazing leaders like you. So thank you for sharing your story and your journey with us.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Godspeed.
All right. So thanks again. Join us next month for Nurture Conversations to be continued, and be well all. Bye-bye.